One brother's in hospital. I think his saturations were low, but otherwise he's okay.
Okay, 1 second. Oh, it's working. It is. Right. Has it skipped? I messed up the beginning. Okay, can you see the can you see the content screen? That's it. Just carry on watching. Just carry on waiting. There's a bit of a delay. We do need to trim the beginning because I've messed up the beginning. Changes of parenting and assistance. Yeah, excellent. Alright, Lele, this is good to go. It is actively streaming now. But before you broadcast, just make sure you upload the make sure we take it into the studio so we can trim the beginning. Yeah? Here, let me give that for you. Okay, Charlie. Okay, we're good to begin. Sorry, Brother Moeed, can you confirm you can see my cover screen? Challenges of parenting in a Western society. Okay, good. Okay, good. If you could just let me know then when you're ready. Sorry? Okay, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to many of you that have come to join us today. The topic, inshallah, we're going to talk about is parenting in a Western society. And inshallah, I have prepared something for you on this topic. And I hope you can all see my screen at this stage. So, inshallah, there's 5 different areas that I want to cover with you. First, we'll go through a quick introduction, and then we'll talk about what it's like to raise girls. And girls have 5 distinct stages of growing up. Then we'll talk about boys, and boys are slightly more simpler than girls. They'll have 3 different stages of growing up. And then we'll go and talk about parenting from the Sunnah, and then you'll have an opportunity to answer any questions. What's worth talking about here is that when we talk about bringing up girls, bringing up boys, and bringing up and within the context of the Deen. This is a pretty new area. Certainly, child psychiatry, child psychology, counselling for children is an area which is emerging, and there is lots of thoughts and ideas that have gone into this, and it's something that Muslims are coming quite new into. So it's important that we important that we understand the implications of this. So the first point I'd like to make on this is about the view of. Sorry. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting a note that there's YouTube issues with live streaming. So we'll see if we can troubleshoot that. But in the meantime, we will carry on with the Zoom call. So the first point to make about this is that many people will instinctively go and say, let's have a look at what Islam says about parenting. And this has been a historical view, but the important point to note on this is that Islam does give you a framework, but it is just that, it's a framework. There isn't very detailed, specific guidance on how to raise your child. To be able to look at that, we should be looking at child psychologists, counsellors, teachers, other parents, and even have a look at what your own parents have done. Many times, people will go to the local sheikh, they'll go to the local imam, and they'll say, look, I'm having these kind of challenges with my children. And those imams and those scholars will try to help. But it's important to bear in mind that just because you're a devout person, just because you understand Islamic rulings, doesn't necessarily make you the best father. And a great example of this is Sayyidina Nuh. Sayyidina Nuh is a Nabi, he's acknowledged by all the Abrahamic faiths, yet still we had a problem where he had a problem where his son didn't accept Islam. His son was not a believer, I should say. So the first point is that, yes, in Islam there is guidance, but that guidance is very much a framework, and quite rightly so, because we'll talk about the second point here, which is that parenting evolves. What worked 1400 years ago for the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he lived in Makkah and they had wet nurses that were coming, that is quite remarkably different to what we have now. Yeah, we are having challenges with YouTube. So just give me one moment, because I know people did want to have people wanted to make sure that they were able to see it working okay on YouTube. Just
I can make sure we can record this session as well, so we can have a backup.
Okay, can I just have a, just bear with me for one moment. Can I just have a quick look at the. Just bear with me for one moment. I think it may be that. Sorry, I do apologise for this, everyone, but inshallah, if we can get this sorted, we may be able to get other people that can take advantage of this. There's people trying to ring me.
I think it's working now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think there's like a small delay between the two, but it's working. Brother Iqbal has confirmed that as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's great. Oh, it's working. Okay, fantastic.
I will hit the record on this section anyway.
Yeah. Okay, well that's great that it's recording. Okay, so a quick catch up, just to get everyone back on the same page again. Islamic parenting, particularly in a Western society, the first thing is Islam gives you a framework. It doesn't give you detailed instructions, and that absolutely is the right thing to do, because parenting is something which evolves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and through the revelation, through the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave instructions which were everlasting. So they were going to last from 1400 years ago up until the trumpet is blown on the day of judgment. And the nature of parenting is that it will change. It will change from one generation to another. It will even change every 2 or 3 years, especially now that we've got this very fast-moving society. For example, we've got social media. The psychological thinking on social media, as it was 2 years ago, is very different to what it is now. And we certainly had that while we were growing up. The advice on what happens when you're watching the TV was very different to what it is now. I mean, growing up, there was many people that were coming up and saying the TV is like a Dajjal, and now people have a very different view on that. So parenting evolves, and what's important to keep in mind is that something that worked for you as a child, it's not necessarily going to work when you are a parent with your children. And also something that might work in India or something that might work in the United States isn't necessarily going to work in the UK, because these are differing societies. So the research that I've done and what I've pulled together here is something which is specific to this day and age and this UK society. It may or may not work in alternative societies. The third point I'd like to make as an introduction to what we're going to talk about is it is very important that you take empirical studies over anecdotes. There is a lot of Muslim parents out there. They'll talk to someone else and they'll get an anecdotal example about something that worked well for somebody else. And it will be a one individual person, and they'll say something like, oh, I did this with my kids and it worked incredibly well. And then other people will try and imitate that. Now, these are anecdotal examples and they may or may not work, but it is no substitute for a child psychologist who has gone and done a mass study with thousands of children in there, assess the long-term impacts of that, and come to conclusions. So I can give you an example on this. There was somebody in Birmingham, and it was a mom, and she said, how I get my child up for Fajr is I will poke him with a stick. I'll carry on poking with him with a stick, and then he gets angry, and then he gets up, and then he goes and prays Fajr. And lots of other women heard that and thought that was a great way to do it, and so they all started imitating it. The advantage that empirical studies gives is that they will look at the long-term consequences of it, because the long-term consequences of this particular boy was that as he got older, he got quite angry and resentful, and he actually died before he hit 20 years old in a very serious car accident. An analogy for this would be things like, if you're sick, you can take anecdotes about, I had a lung infection and I took turmeric and it was great and I got better, and that might work, but it's only a trained doctor who will say, this is the particular type of antibiotic that I should prescribe you. You take it for this period of time, you take this dosage, and then if you're still not better, come back to me. There is a remarkable difference between a trained doctor treating your pneumonia or your lung infection versus anecdotal examples you've got from someone who attends the same mosque. So even though we shouldn't ignore anecdotes because there's just not enough Muslim contributions in this field, but we certainly should take empirical studies over anecdotes. No matter how uncomfortable the empirical studies, what kind of conclusions they draw for us, we shouldn't try to run away from it. So if they say things about some of the impacts of social media, we shouldn't bury our heads in the sand and say that doesn't affect me. We should go and we should embrace that and we should understand that. My fourth point on this is child psychology from an Islamic lens is something where there is insufficient contributions on. There is some great Muslims that are starting to take child psychology very seriously. They are predominantly from the US and they are working with children who sometimes have quite extreme issues. But as you have children or people that enjoy psychology as a field, encourage them to go within this area because this is a great area. There's a massive need for Muslims to come into this area and talk about child psychology from the Islamic lens. So please do encourage that. The fifth point I'd like to make before we get stuck right in is that child psychology is a science, but parenting is an art. If you're coming here and expecting some kind of model that you can go and apply to your children, it will make you the perfect parent, it will make you the perfect child, that's just never going to happen. If that was the case, we could program a computer through artificial intelligence to become the perfect parent, and that's never going to happen because a computer can't understand spirit, a computer can't understand love, it can't understand compassion. And these are the things that you need to be able to be a good parent. So there will be no one-size-fits-all model. There will be no silver bullet. There will be principles. There will be guidance. There will be research and studies that we will draw conclusions from. And lastly, before we get stuck in, I would say you cannot outsource parenting. You need to take responsibility as a parent for your children. And you will make mistakes, and your children will be your biggest critics, and they will pick out every single mistake that you make. And the reason why your children are your biggest critics is because they always expect you to be perfect. So anything which is less than perfect, they pick up on it and say, oh, well, I thought mom and dad were perfect. I thought mom was perfect. I thought dad was perfect. And actually, they're not. They made this mistake. And then it's something which is quite amazing to them. But we'll talk about how you deal with that. But what I want you to do to understand is don't make the parenting of your child somebody else's problem. It is your problem. It's your problem. Your accountability. So take responsibility. So let's move on to the first large section on this, which is about raising girls. Men and women are different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given different commands and duties to men and women because they are different. This is backed up by child psychologists and counselors, Muslim and non-Muslim. And they have come up with different ways of raising girls and different ways of raising boys. I'm not going to talk about all of it, but we're going to go through it quite briefly. With girls, they've pretty much said there are 5 stages of girlhood. And I'm sure any of you sisters that are here, you should be able to relate to these. The first stage is about security. It's from about birth to 2 years old. And all they want to know is, am I safe and am I loved? And if the answer to that question should be yes. And we'll talk about what happens if it's no. The second stage is the one about exploring. Is the world a fun and interesting place? And we're talking about 2 to 5 years. And then once they've got to the conclusion that the world is a fun and interesting place, then they start developing their people skills on how to interact with other people. And they're talking about 5 to 10 years. Then we're talking about finding her soul, or finding her identity, I prefer to call it. What is it that this girl is looking to pursue in her life? How does she want to live that fulfilling life? And you're talking about 10 to 14 years. And then it's, how do I mature and become an adult? How do I take responsibility? And you're looking about 14 to 18 years for that. These are just broad brushes. Some people are quicker, some people are slower, but these are the fundamental 5 stages everyone goes to. When you have a trauma or you have something tragic that happens to you, you will regress. So if you are at stage 3 where you're building skills with people and one of your parents dies or someone close to you has a tragic accident, you can regress and go back to stage 2. So it's not necessarily linear. Let's explain each one of these stages now to understand what it means. And what the point of making this clear to you guys is it will help you to understand what kind of parenting you need to adopt. What kind of style of parenting do you need to adopt so you can take your baby through stage 1, that you can take your teenager through stage 4, that you can take your now nearly adult through stage 5. So we're going to talk about what they go through, and then you can be best placed to understand how you facilitate that transition whilst they're in that phase. So you've got a brand new girl, mashallah, your wife has given birth, and you brought that baby home. For the first 2 years of their life, there is important nurturing that needs to happen. That child, that little girl, once she gets to 2 years old, should come to the conclusion that she is safe and that she's loved. It's important for the baby in those 2 years to believe that she can trust her parents. So how you interact with her has got to be in that way that the baby, even though she's very small, is going to trust you. If she doesn't trust you at the end of 2 years, she's going to stay in this stage. She's going to end up being very clingy. She's going to be someone that will always latch onto you. She's never going to let you go because she's worried you're going to go elsewhere. So what you need to do is you need to be able to build that trust within them. Babies will always have a natural anxiety, or what they need to do is within the first period of their life is to have parents that are calm, that are emotionally present. The baby is always going to be someone who's very excited, is always going to be very playful, is always going to want to be doing lots and lots of different things. And what's really important is for you to encourage that. Encourage them to go out, encourage them to play with things, to make noise, do all of that kind of stuff. It comes very natural to the baby. But you should be a calming influence over them and being emotionally present for them. At this age, it is too early to try and educate them. I know some people think that, you put headphones on the baby and it says A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's far too early to be doing anything like this. You shouldn't focus on educating the baby. Just enjoy them for the first 2 years. Some parents try to force the baby into a particular lifestyle. And, you can see people like Gina Ford and some of these thinkers, they come from that. Force the child into a rigor and a routine so you can carry on with your lives, potentially working and doing all these kind of things. That's particularly controversial. Generally, the thinking from people like Penelope Leach, from Steve Biddulph, I'll go through the bibliography of some of these thinkers and child psychologists that I've used, is no, don't force the baby to fit into your lifestyle. You should alter your lifestyle to look after the baby. Prepare to have your life turned on its head and accept it and make the most out of it. So that's from birth to 2 years. Let's talk about the next 2 years. So out of this, what you should have is a baby that trusts the parents. The baby doesn't trust the parents, you're going to have a number of issues that are going to come later on in life. The next stage is about exploring. This is where the child will come up with a conclusion: is the world a fun and interesting place? So give them an opportunity to explore. Let them go and let them play around. Everything should be fun. They want to go into the garden. They want to make a mess. That's fine. They want to try lots of different clothes on. That's great. They want to play football. That's great. They want to cut stuff out. It doesn't matter. The point at this particular phase is that they should be able to try everything that they want to try. And if they don't want to try something, don't necessarily force it onto them. Don't at this stage start saying to them, you are going to be a doctor when you're older, or you are going to be a housewife when you're older. It's too early to be able to do things like this. What's better for them at this particular stage is to be able to come out as someone who has got backbone, someone who's competent at what they do, and they are strong where it counts. It is important as well to discipline at this stage as well, but we'll come on to that a little bit more later on. The next stage after this, so when they get to about 5 to 10 years, they go on to the third stage. So what they've discovered so far is they've discovered mum and dad can be trusted. They've also discovered as well that the world is a very interesting and nice place to be. If they don't come to the conclusion that the world is a nice place to be, you're going to end up with a child who is someone who is incapable of interacting with the outside world. They are going to be someone who is only comfortable being cocooned away from that. They think that the world is scary. They're not ready to be able to embrace it. And everything for them is a trial. Everything for them is incredibly hard work. The way to avoid that situation, I'm sure we've all seen children that are like that, they're almost disturbed, is to encourage them in stage 2 to be able to go out and interact and do things that they enjoy doing. Now that they've interacted and they found that the world is a nice and safe place to go and it's okay to go exploring, the third stage is about building the skills. And that's where things like friendship come in. That's where things like social skills come in as well. This is where they learn things like friendliness, sharing, empathy, controlling your aggression, apologizing when you're doing something wrong, reading someone's emotions so you know how to interact with them, knowing who you can and who you can't trust. These are key skills that will equip them to be the mothers of the future, to be wives of their husbands, and to make a positive contribution to society. It's these kind of skills that they start developing at 5 to 10 years of old. They're also going to copy you. They're going to see how you behave, and they're going to imitate that kind of behavior amongst themselves. They're also going to, so out of the skills that they're learning, there's also emotions that they're going to face. They're going to face anger, fear, sorrow, and joy. Now, when they experience these emotions, it's you as a parent can't avoid them from getting angry or fearful or sorrowful or joyful. You shouldn't stop them from doing that. It's important that they experience these emotions so that they are able to guide them when they're older. It's healthy for you to get angry at things, but it's how you show that anger which is important. Do you start screaming and shouting and smashing things, or do you communicate with that person? It's important that you feel fear, because fear is that thing that stops you from hurting yourself later on. So it's a good reaction it's a good emotion to experience. As is sorrow, that remorsefulness when you miss somebody. If you don't feel the sorrow, well, that's one of the attributes of a psychopath. And joy is how you build positivity in your life. You don't want to be someone who's going to be miserable throughout your life. So it's important from 5 to 10 that they are building these skills of friendliness, sharing, empathy, controlling your aggression, apologizing and reading emotions, and knowing who to trust. And it's also important for them to learn about how to handle their emotions and to nurture these emotions within them so they are a positive influence and not a negative influence. At this age, children will need to be disciplined, and there is a number of ways that you can do it. You can use the way of trying to befriend them, but don't always be their friend. You are their parent. So you've got 3 ways that you can deal with an unruly child. One is you can try and befriend them. The second one is you can fight them, or use fear to be able to discipline them. Or the third one is you can ignore it. It's up to you to exercise that judgment of if they are playing up. So say, for example, if they go and hit another child, you might say, actually, you've hit another child, that's punishment, we're going to put you on the naughty step. You may even choose to hit your children. That's something that is entirely up to you to do, but there's a clear punishment there. You could choose, if it's something else that they've done, maybe they've stolen something, that it's more appropriate for you to ignore it. That's the flight. Or if it's something that they're really upset about, that they're always coming from school, you might want to tend and befriend and talk to them about what's happening in school. But these are 3 valid ways that you can use to be able to discipline. And don't be shy if your children want to get into things like sports. Just because they enjoy doing some kind of sport, you can channel and you can nurture that in another way. But it would be wrong for you to say things like, you shouldn't be doing, you shouldn't be doing aerobics because you're a girl. There is ways to be able to do things like that in the privacy of your home, in an Islamic way. So you can encourage things like that. And this could be things like badminton, swimming, cycling. They can do that from 5 to 10. As they get older, we can figure out how to, if it's something they want to do, how we can do that in an Islamic way. But what's important here is that you're not suppressing them. You're not suppressing your daughters. So what happens now once they get from 10 to 14 years old? Well, now that they have discovered that I can trust my parents, that the world is an exciting place, that I'm building some basic skills on how to deal with other people, the 4th thing they're doing is, what am I passionate about? There's child psychologists, they call this a spark. What is the thing that gives me joy, that gives me purpose, that gives me a creative way to be able to make a contribution? It's about encouraging your daughter to be able to try lots of different things. And it might be that she decides she wants to care for the environment. She might decide that she wants to care about poverty, or it could be global injustice. There could be any number of things that she finds that gives her a passion. It gives her a sense of purpose, about something that she really cares about. One of the psychologists described this quite well. It's like it's like a flower that's ready to blossom, but she's building up her reserves in winter to be able to get ready to be able to blossom. The reason why this is important for a child who's 10 to 14 years old is that it gives her strength. It gives her a sense of identity and purpose. And why it's so important is that if you have a look at many girls that are 10 to 14 year olds that have problems, it's because they are under pressure and they don't have that sense of purpose. And in an attempt to conform to other people, to seek other people's approval, they will then compromise what they've been taught to do. However, by giving them that sense of purpose, you give them a tremendous amount of self-belief. And that self-belief is something that will help make key decisions, like who her friends are going to be, what kind of career path she's considering going down, what kind of things. And girls at this age do start thinking about things like husbands. What kind of attributes would she be looking for within a husband? And it's important that during this stage that she gets that sense of purpose to be able to give her that inner strength. A girl who knows her own identity may be a gentle girl, but she will also have she'll also have steel in her. She won't be manipulated. She won't have false friends. She'll be loyal. She'll be tough, and she'll be protective of those around her. She'll be protective of herself. And naturally, if that finding her sense of purpose is that I want to be a devout Muslimah, that would be incredibly powerful. But if it's not that, don't force it. Don't force it. Let her come to her own conclusions. So now your daughter has got to an age, she's got that sense of purpose. She knows what it is that she wants to do with her life. And it might be, I want to be a human rights lawyer. It might be, I just want to be a housewife. It might be, I want to be a doctor and I want to save children's lives. It might be, I want to go and alleviate global poverty. Whatever it will be a noble cause, inshallah. And it's something that you want to encourage. And we'll talk about social media later on as well, and how that acts as a cancer against it. From 14 to 18 years old, your young girl is now getting ready for womanhood. And she's going to think that she's ready to be an adult. She might even consider herself to be an adult, but she's far from it. She's far from it. She needs a lot of hand-holding to go from 14 to 18 years old. And in some societies, they will even go and they will have women that will mentor them, they'll kind of go out into outer society and spend time with a much older woman, and she'll kind of teach her the ways of womanhood. She'll teach her the ways of womanhood. It's during the 14 to 18 years old, they will have a rite of passage. This could be any kind of trauma, and it will make them realize that actually you're not a girl anymore. You're responsible for the things that are happening in your life. And that kind of trauma could be anything. It could be a friend who dies in a car accident. It could be a teenage pregnancy of someone they know. It could be someone who's groomed on social media. But something will happen and your girl will realize, wow, we're responsible for our own own actions. There is consequences for it, and they can be quite dangerous. So every girl does go through a rite of passage where she realizes how what being a woman is about. And it's important for you as parents to be there to be able to support her on that, to make sure she makes the right decisions and that it doesn't affect her in a negative way, falling into depression and so forth, and self-harming. These are all examples of things like this. It's also at these ages that the children will realize, the teenagers will realize, that bad things will happen. You are not going to be able to stop bad things happening to your children. What's important that you teach them is resilience and growth. It's not how do I stop things bad happening to you. It's when something bad happens to you, how do we overcome that? How do we overcome that and carry on and use it as something that makes us stronger? So the output of this is that you will have an 18-year-old who is not a woman, but she's ready to take that journey into womanhood. That should be the output of that. So that, in summary, is the 5 stages of a girl as she goes from 0 to 2, understanding that she can trust her parents, from 2 to 5, which is discovering the world is a nice place, from 5 to 10, which is learning those interrelationship skills, 10 to 14, finding her purpose in life, 14 to 18, stepping into womanhood, and then from then on, she will be an adult, and you should treat her like an adult. So that's for raising girls. Let's talk about raising boys. And what I'm talking about here isn't speculatory at all. There is empirical evidence to be able to suggest this, And I would suggest that you talk to your wives, talk to your sisters, and see if that they would agree with these models, to give you confidence that these models do exist and they are correct, inshallah. When it comes to raising boys, and I think the majority of us are men on this, I think we should be able to relate to all of these. Men are a lot more simpler than girls, a lot more simpler. That's why Allah's given us different commands and different responsibilities. We only have 3 stages. We have birth to 6, which are the gentle years. We have 6 to 14 years, where you're learning to be a male, and from 14 and beyond, we're becoming a man. So the first 6 years is pretty much where you are a mummy's boy. I've put a good summary of this is I love my mum. Here, what a child should be taught, the mum is going to be the primary caregiver here. As far as the dad is concerned, it's like, it's great that you've got a son, but he's going to be very close to his mum. And the father, you have a secondary role, the mum is going to have the primary role. This will flip in the next stage. But for 0 to 6 years, the boy is going to be really close to the mum. In this phase, you should just be showing the child trust, warmth, fun, kindness. He doesn't need to be masculine. He doesn't need to be lifting weights. He doesn't need to be taking tools and trying to repair stuff. That's not required at this stage. It's just important for them to be loved, to trust the parents, to be able to have fun, to know that they are important in someone else's life. The next stage is the stage where the boy now starts separating from his mum a bit. The boy will say, spent a lot of time with mum, but actually they get to that age where you always think, my dad's the best. My dad is the best. He's the best at this. He's the best at this. He's the best at this. And I think all of us guys have been through that stage where you think, actually, no one can do anything better than your dad. So the boy latches onto the father a lot more. This is an opportunity for you as a father to be able to encourage and influence your boy in the right way. If that means sharing anecdotes, sharing hobbies, spending time together, this is where the boy is going to lay down solid memories. He's going to learn behaviors from you. And this is your opportunity to have a positive influence on your son. The next stage is when he gets to 14 and beyond. And it's important that you do the previous stage well, because at this stage, he's actually not going to want to be like dad anymore. What's going to happen is his testosterone goes through the roof. It's increased by 800%. You're going to find him argumentative, restless, moody. All your son is trying to do is he is trying to assert his own masculinity. He's trying to establish himself as an adult, and that's why he's resisting you. And dads will say things like, oh, my boy, he used to be so great. He used to follow me around and say, dad this, dad that, dad this. And now all he does is he just argues with me. He stays in bed all day. I tell him to do stuff. He just grunts at me and he disappears. Well, this is him trying to assert his independence. He's trying to say, I'm my own person. I can make my own decisions. Now, what's really important in this stage is as he starts looking beyond his dad for role models, is to provide him with very good role models. Whether that's an uncle, whether that's an older student, whether that's someone respectable in the community, whether that's one of the shayukh, whomever. It's important that at 14 years old, or when he gets to this stage where he wants to go beyond his father and he finds someone else, it's important that that person that is now nurturing and helping him grow is a positive role model. If it's a negative role model, your son is going to be in a lot of trouble. He's going to be in a lot of trouble. So it's about finding the positive role models for them when they're in that stage. It's also important in this stage to expect the children to be arrogant. Your boys will become arrogant. That's because they are trying to build their confidence in them. So confidence is good, but arrogance is bad. How you keep your boys as confident and not arrogant is treat them to be humble. You're going to be stronger than most other people. So when you do something wrong, make sure you apologize. You're going to be smarter than a lot of people. So don't humiliate someone because they're not as intelligent as you. You're going to have people that are older than you. So make sure you are respectful when you're talking to them. So it's great that they have confidence. And when you see them behaving arrogantly or even being arrogant towards you, don't fight it. All you have to do is you have to tone it down through humbleness. So teach them humility. It's also important for boys at this age to give them structure in their lives. So you shouldn't Kowtow to your children. Don't let your children dictate to you what should and shouldn't happen. Boys need firm order, they need firm rules, they need consequences for breaking those rules. And some of the most successful teachers are, or counselors, are teachers and counselors who, with their children, with their pupils, they are firm but fair. The children know if I break the rules, there's going to be a problem. But if I listen to what he's telling me, I'm going to develop myself and I will succeed. And boys will respect that. Boys will not respect a pushover. So it is important not to be a pushover to any of your children. So that's the child psychologist stance. Looking at girls going through their 5 stages, looking at boys going through their 3 stages. And please do reflect on that and see to what extent you agree with it, and ask other people how they went through it. But what is important is you don't have one static model of parenting. Your parenting will be different for each one of those children, each one of your children. It will also be generationally different. So something that works, if you've got a 10-year gap between, say, a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old, what works for the 15-year-old might not then work for the 5-year-old 10 years later. So it's important that you understand that these are the things that happen, but how do I as a parent, how am I able to best help my children through that? So let's now have a look at parenting from the Sunnah. And the source of this is mainly from these child psychologists that are also Muslim. And it's a very fast-growing field. There's very little that's in there, but I do hope that there's going to be a lot more in here. And this is great as a first iteration of it, but I hope we have subsequent other iterations that are going to be a lot stronger and a lot more robust. Parenting from the Sunnah, the first point I'd like to make this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. Indeed, in the Messenger of Allah, you have the best example. So follow him, and he who hopes to meet Allah on the last day, for the one who hopes to meet Allah on the last day. So we will look at the life of the Messenger of Allah. Now, it's really important for me when I talk about these. I don't want to now talk about anecdotes and there's this worked really well for this one sister at this one mosque, and this one brother, he had a problem with his son smoking, so he just really beat him black and blue, and then it's all fixed now. It's all right. It's important that we go back to our principles, which is empirical studies. So the first question is, what is the objective of parenting? When you ask this question of what is the objective of parenting, people will say different things. I want my son to be rich. I want my daughters to marry into really good husbands. We want them to be successful in dunya and akhirah. There's many different theories on what the objective of parenting is. But the consensus from Muslim and non-Muslim child psychologists is that the objective of parenting is to develop the character of your children so they can regulate themselves. So your job as a parent isn't to make your child a millionaire. It's not to have them praying 5 times a day, although that's a sub-objective. It's not to make your child famous. It's to develop the character of your child. It's to develop their character. And what does it mean to develop their character? Well, it means in all aspects. Morally, spiritually, professionally, academically. And their character should have integrity with it as well. They should understand boundaries, what should and shouldn't be done. They should adhere to the haram and the halal. They should understand character means that when you conduct a certain action, that it has consequences. A bad action will have a bad consequence. A good action will have good consequences. Good character means to be balanced. Balanced emotionally, balanced physically, balanced mentally. Now, how do you build this character? Well, the focus has got to be on behaviors. It's got to be on establishing the behaviors that will give your child the right character. So let me give you an example of this. Many parents are quite goal-oriented, and a common thing that I hear a lot is, how do I get my kids past the 11 plus? I want my kids to go to a grammar school. How do I get them to past the 11 plus? Now, you'll see a lot of children that go and do the 11 plus, and their parents have just beaten them into submission. They've sat there, they've yelled at them, they've scolded them, they've threatened them. they've compared their children to other people, saying that person's going to pass, you're going to be left behind. All of that just to be able to pass the 11 plus. And many children who have gone through that kind of abuse do pass their 11 plus, but their behavior is appalling. They have no self-confidence. They are people who are easily manipulated. They have low self-esteem, a low sense of self-worth. And if you compare that to what you will do in a professional capacity, when you're interviewing someone for a job, you're not that bothered about what grades they've got, whether they got 111 in the 11 plus. The whole point of an interview is to assess their behaviors and see if their behaviors fit for your organization. So if we do want the Muslim youth of today to grow up and to be innovators in their particular field, to be positive contributions to society, to be successful people, if we want all of that to happen, we need to focus on their behaviors and not necessarily focus on their goals. So focus on the behavior more than you focus on the goal. If you're going to build a goal, if you're going to have a goal like past the 11 plus, build the behaviors to achieve that goal. So the understanding of hard work, persistence, constantly being able to do it again, achieving high. These are the kind of behaviors you build in them, and then they will go and they will achieve the goal on their own. But don't spoon feed them the goal. So how do you go and build character? Well, it does require a change. It requires a change in how you interact them. So don't say to your children, if you catch your child cheating, don't say cheating is bad. Say, look, you are not a cheater. You see that cheating is bad? You're talking about the particular action. You are not a cheater. You're addressing the behavior. Your behavior is that you are not a cheater. And if they do something good, like someone was hungry and they gave them some food, you don't say, oh, well done for sharing your food. Say, you are a compassionate person because you did this. You're making it about their behavior. And what it does is it builds that good behavior on them. And that behavior is the sign of good character. And that is your objective as a parent. Now, the Muslim psychologists are really good on this, because what they do is, this is not an ijtihad, but they will go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and they will say, look, there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us this as well. So if you look at these three ayat that I've put, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Inna Allaha yuhibbut tawwabin wa yuhibbul mutatahhirin, and Wallahu yuhibbul mutahhirin, Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin, Wallahu yuhibbul, Allah always said, Allah loves those who do this. Allah loves those who seek repentance, who are steadfast in prayer, those who purify themselves, those who do good. Allah is always addressing the behaviors. If you look at all of these, there's many verses of the Quran where Allah says, Allah loves these type of people. Allah is addressing the behaviors. So the Muslim child psychologist, it's a fantastic conclusion, because you look at this and you say, oh my God, it was right here in front of my eyes, and now the empirical evidence has proven it. I can see that it's there. You praise the behavior. Your job is to build the right behavior. That is the character of the person. So focus on the character, the behavior of the child more than anything else. So that's the first point I'd like to make on it. The second great lesson I'd like to share with you is, what is the correct parenting style that you should adopt? What is the correct parenting style that we should adopt? The answer is, it's about unconditional love and compassion. Anas ibn Malik reported, Anas ibn Malik, قال ما رأيت أحدا كان أرحم بالعيال من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Anas ibn Malik reported, I've never seen anyone more compassionate to his children than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sahih Muslim. What that means is that your children have to be loved. They have to know. They'll sometimes forget it. You can't just assume that they understand that they're being loved. What builds that kind of hatred and negativity, and it creates psychopaths, is because they don't feel that kind of love. And then when they grow up and they become adults, they are unable to share that with other people. No, they'll sometimes forget it. You can't just assume that they understand that they're being loved. Oh, sorry. What builds that kind of hatred and negativity and creates psychopaths is because they don't feel that kind of love. And then when they grow up and they become adults. Sorry, that was my that was the YouTube stream. Right.
So it's important for your children to show them unconditional love and compassion. So kindness, empathy, generosity, acceptance, they will need these as adults. When you come across an adult who doesn't have these things, you don't want to be anywhere near them. They need to have this to be able to be successful. They need to know that they're being loved unconditionally. But when you love them unconditionally, you also hold them accountable. So yes, you've done something wrong, but that unconditional love doesn't mean I'm going to let you go. I'm going to hold you accountable for it. You're going to set them consistent boundaries. One of the biggest problems that child nannies come up with, children that they troubles children that they have to deal with, is that the parents were unable to enforce a consistent boundary. One day it was wrong to do something, the next day they did it, and there was no consequences. So because of that inconsistency, the child thinks the parent isn't really serious. They lose respect for them. Children need someone there guiding them. They need a North Star to guide them. If they don't have that, they will constantly break that. And so when the parent didn't give the consistent boundaries, the child didn't get what he needed or she needed, and therefore they misbehaved. It's also important with that unconditional love that you absolutely respect your children. You don't humiliate them. Your children, and if you think about your relation with your own parents, you sometimes forget what you did wrong, but what you do remember is how they made you feel. And there could be a time that maybe you did do something wrong, maybe you even didn't do something wrong, but that you were completely humiliated by it, and that left a scar. And so part of having that unconditional love and compassion, because the hadith says anyone with more compassion to their children. What does it mean to have compassion to your children? It means just because you're stronger than them, just because they look up to you, just because they have this unconditional love for you. And I don't think anyone's going to deny that their children, certainly as they are younger, have unconditional love for their parents. They do. But you need to reciprocate that, and you need to show them what that means. So having that compassion means you're not humiliating your children, because that will leave a scar with them. It's also important to not confuse pleasure with happiness. Sometimes people being compassionate to their children means that they're constantly giving them sweets. And this is this is creating a problem of childhood obesity. So giving your children sweets is giving them pleasure, but it's not going to give them happiness, because they're going to grow miserable, because they're going to be overweight, they're going to have health problems, they're going to have problems finding a spouse. So it's important that you don't confuse pleasure and happiness. Your children will be happy when you show them unconditional love and compassion. They're not going to be happy when you neglect your duties as a parent to build the right behaviors in them. This is an important role for fathers here as well. So with fathers, they can, one of the child psychologists here, named Minahal Begawala, she said some of the most damaged people I have seen is because they've got an emotionally absent father. And she made this point, which I was very surprised to hear, that some fathers think they just go out, they get the money, and then that will be enough for their children. That is not enough for your children. And it's not enough for your children just for the mum to say, wait till dad gets home, and then he comes in and he's the bad cop and he yells at them and tells them off. A father has to be emotionally there for his children. You are the first Prince Charming for your daughters. You are the first role model for your son. That relationship is going to determine every other relationship that they have afterwards. So you have to be there as a father, emotionally present in the lives of your children, taking them through each one of their stages, building the right behaviors within them. This is the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's talk about high achieving children. So everyone wants high achieving children, right? So what have the studies shown us about high achieving? How do you get these high achieving children? Well, and the first point about how you do this is very interesting, and it took me a while to be able to understand. It took me a while to get my head around this one. So the first thing is, don't praise the achievement. If you're, there's a tendency, your son comes home, he goes, oh, Dad, I got the highest in this particular test. And you go, I got the highest in the class on the test. And you say, oh yeah, well done. He comes back and he goes, I got the second highest in the test. And you go, oh, well, why didn't you get first best? It's this thing where as parents, there's a natural tendency to focus on achievements. But if you really want high achieving children, what you should do is don't focus on the achievement. Focus on the effort and the perseverance in them. So they did this study. What they did was they got a bunch of children. They split them into two. They gave them the exact same test, right? And it was an average difficulty test, and everyone did that. With Group A, what they said to those children was, you achieved really well. Wow, you got 80%, you got 90%. Well done, you got 90%. Great stuff. With the second half of the class, what they said to them was, you tried really hard. I saw how much effort you put into that. That was really good, how much effort you put in that. And that effort is exemplary. I wish we had more people doing that. So one were praised for achievement, the second were praised for effort. Then they were given another test. Now this was a very difficult test. Those kids that achieved high in the first test knew they weren't going to achieve high in the second test. So you know what? They just stopped doing it. This is rubbish, I'm not doing it, I'm out, hands up, forget it, it's too difficult. So they walked out on that. The second group, who were praised for effort, they continued and tried on the second test. And they did a lot better. The second group achieved a lot higher than the first group. And this is a great lesson in life. If you look at your adult lives, what you've achieved in your professional careers and so forth, you will find that actually it's more important to try your best at something. If you only stuck with those things that you achieved highly in, you would probably still be a teacher teaching, let's just say there's a boy and he's good at maths and he's not good at anything else and he just stays with the thing that he's good at and he doesn't take any risks, he doesn't go out and he doesn't fail. He is probably going to end up as a maths teacher. But if you have a look at many of the successful entrepreneurs, many of the successful innovators, they have tried different things and they have failed at things. And that failure was something which was encouraged. It was like, hey, you tried your best. It doesn't matter. Pick yourself up and try again. And the fact that they picked themselves and they were resilient against that failure is something that has made them successful. So they're not afraid to fail at something. Whereas someone who's hooked on high achievement and is only praised for his achievement will be afraid of failure, so they're not going to try anything new. They're going to be afraid of failing. And part of this, it doesn't help. So for example, there's a race and there's 6 people that are running in the race. There is a tendency for some parents to mock the kid that came in 6th, saying, oh, look how rubbish he is, he came in 6th. If their kid came in 6th, they'd be embarrassed. Oh yeah, 6 people ran a race and my kid came 6th. He's the worst at it. But by teaching them to try again and again and give 100% effort, that kid who came 6th, if he sticks with it, eventually he'll be 2nd. He may even be 1st. But it's that trying, it's that resilience, that ability to try again and again and again. That is more important than achieving highly. So if you want high achieving kids, the first thing you should be doing is praise the effort. Do not praise the achievements. The second thing is this idea of deferred gratification. They did this other study. What they did was they got some kids and they said, either you can have a cupcake now, or if you wait till tomorrow, you can have 2 cupcakes. The majority of the children who went and took a cupcake now, they were the lower achievers. Now, for several years, they assessed them again. They were lower achievers. One who learned deferred gratification, taking 2 cupcakes the next day, they were the higher achievers. And you can see this manifest itself as well. You would rather spend 2 years in education rather than working to be able to get a certification that will allow you to get a better kind of job. So this idea of not this instant gratification, something that social media really encourages, is something that should be avoided. So this idea of deferred gratification is really important. The idea of self-control as well, being able to control, not losing your own, not falling into temptation, not falling into whatever's the easier way to do something. So, if you take a very example, an example of a maths problem, the child that will stick with that maths problem up until he gets it is going to be a child that's going to achieve a lot more than the one who gets frustrated, gives up, and walks away. And then the fourth one about achieving high achieving children is emotional intelligence. Get them to understand what other people are thinking, why they are thinking that, and how to best deal with that. So don't say things to your children like, you're a smart guy. Say, hey, you tried your very best. When they fail at something, don't ridicule them. Say, it was really brave that you tried something when you weren't good at it. And they'll keep with it, and eventually, inshallah, they'll be good at many different things. So it's, even though it sounds odd, it's important that you encourage your children to fail. You know, we have this principle in the corporate world, which is fail fast, something that we've learned from the innovators. But it's okay to fail. If you're not failing at anything, it means you're not trying it hard enough. So take risks, celebrate failures, teach humility, and it also teaches you not to mock other people that have failed. It also teaches you how to handle disappointment and loss. It teaches you how to deal with consequences. You are not going to live a life where you don't deal with any kind of disappointment. If you do, you're living too sheltered a life. And a Muslim psychologist made a great point on this. This idea of reward the effort over the achievement. Well, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he said this. When he said, the one who knows how to read Quran, for him is one reward. The one who doesn't know how to read Quran, and he's going in it with all of his effort, for him there's 2 rewards. So 2 rewards for effort and 1 reward for achievement. And this, when they said that, it finally landed with me, and I was like, that's a great point. And now I do understand the importance of that. Let's talk briefly about social media. Social media is dangerous. It is dangerous. The long-term consequences of it are not understood. And it's something that you can't avoid. Everyone is going to engage in it. Why is it dangerous? Because it encourages disrespect. It encourages immodesty. It's dangerous as well because what happens is if you tell your child off and they storm off into their room and they go on social media, they will just come across like-minded people who will validate their behavior and tell them that the parents are being unreasonable. So it creates this echo chamber. And if you have a look at some of the child psychologists like Leonard Sachs, he says girls should be raised by multi-generational women as it helps them develop. So, but what social media does is because there's so many people on it, you will only hang around with like-minded people. Camera phones are incredibly dangerous. Do you remember, certainly when I was growing up, there was this big thing about the paparazzi that were always photographing celebrities, and celebrities always had to look their best, and we know what happened with the paparazzi and Diana, that tragedy. But with camera phones, they are constantly using this to take pictures. So we've got our young teenage girls that are out there who have got an enormous amount of pressure to look a certain way. And if they don't look that way, then it damages their self-confidence, it damages their sense of self-worth. Social media is making people selfish, it's making them self-centered, it promotes this idea of materialism, of consumerism, of going out and buying things and living in a certain lifestyle. So it's really dangerous, and you can't avoid it. You can't say to your children, don't go on social media. If you can, then alhamdulillah, that's really great. But they might sneak away and do it on their own. They might find that it's, there will come a time where they will embrace it. They'll come out of your influence and they'll embrace it. So how do you deal with it? Well, Dr. Martin Seligman, who is a child psychologist, he says social media is not going to give you happiness. It might give you that instant gratification. It might give you the likes when that hit of the endorphin rush when someone hits a like on a picture that you've uploaded. But that's going to be temporary. What will give you happiness is meaning, living for something bigger than yourself. And that's why that earlier stage is so important, where your daughter is finding out, what is it that gives me purpose? What is it that I'm passionate about? I'm passionate about the environment or child poverty. What is it that I'm passionate about? That's the thing that will give them happiness, or what we would say in Islam is tranquility, because we say happiness only comes in Jannah. What else you can do for your children is teach them humility. Teach them things about how do you put other people in front of you. Many of the Anbiya, in their training to be prophets, many of the Mufassirin say they were shepherds, because shepherds teaches you how to guide helpless people who have got limited guidance, people who can be quite ignorant and foolish. So the prophets were shepherds to be able to tend to their herd that way. So teach your children to be shepherds. Give them charity work to do. Give them chores to do. This will teach them humility, where you're doing stuff for other people, often thankless tasks. Teach your children that just because you get what you want, that doesn't mean you're successful. And also create family time. Create family time, because that will offset the echo chamber, which is social media. There's a famous hadith by the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is a long one, I haven't put the Arabic in there, but the Messenger of Allah said, every one of you is a shepherd, and that shepherd is responsible for his flock. The man is the guardian of his family and he is responsible for them. The woman is the guardian of her husband's home and his children and she is responsible for them. So it's important that you, as a shepherd responsible for your flock, deal with this danger of social media. The next point I'd like to make to you is about building good relationships. How do you build good relationships? As a parent, you need to have good relationships with each of your children. To build a good relationship, a good and fulfilling relationship, I would say, is that you need three things. You need a foundation of positivity. You get that positivity by listening to each other, by respecting one another, by not criticizing one another, by making sure you trust them. So once you've got that foundation of positivity, then you need to enforce it with two things. One is vulnerability, where you share with each other, where you accept that you make mistakes, you accept your shortcomings, you're being open. So if you make a mistake parenting your children, I wouldn't say you have to go and apologize for it. You don't have to apologize to your children. It's not that kind of relationship. But you should accept that if you've made a mistake, hey, I made a mistake. So vulnerability is important. And then the other tenet is consistency. You need to be consistent with the positivity and vulnerability. So frequency of communication, constantly reinforcing those values. That's how you will build that good and fulfilling relationship. If you apply this model to those good relationships you have and those toxic relationships you have, you will see that these three things hold true, inshallah. So what does it mean to spend time? It's important to know that every interaction is not going to be a positive interaction, but the ratio that the psychologists have said between a positive and a negative reaction should be 5-1. So for every one negative reaction, you need 5 positive interactions for that good and fulfilling relationship to manifest. And it's not going to happen overnight, but once you do establish this, you will be able to have a good relationship. So how do you get your family to spend more time together? Well, you have to demonstrate by example that family time comes first. It's more important than friends. And you've got to enjoy that time that you spend with your family. And you've got to make it a wholesome environment. If you're always yelling at everyone, mum and dad are yelling at each other, the children don't want to be part of that toxic environment. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Some of the best times you'll have as a family is where you're just sitting there, you're talking, you're laughing, you're doing silly things, and you're just having a really good time. And no one feels belittled, no one feels hurt, no one feels insulted. But that kind of wholesome fun is what you're trying to inject. That time shouldn't be disturbed by friends, it shouldn't be disturbed by a mobile phone, and it's great to be able to have that at dinner time. And it's important to make a principle that when we're having family time together, it's not negotiable. Where you can't walk out of that and say, I'm going to go and do something else. With vulnerability, there's a couple of points I wanted to make on this. And there's a great book called Siblings with Rivalry, which I've mentioned in the bibliography later on. When children argue with each other, this is not necessarily a bad thing. When your children are arguing with each other, or even with other people their own age, what they are learning is how to deal with disputes. So you shouldn't step in there and start saying he's wrong and he's right. Teach them the means to be able to turn an argument into a civil discourse. And some of the best people at civil discourse is actually the politicians. I don't know about the politicians in other countries around the world, but certainly in the UK, if you have a look in the House of Parliament, people are able to make their points. And some people will agree, some people will disagree. But they never go to fist fights. They never go to insulting that person's individual characteristics, or trying to humiliate them and say, remember when your family member did that, or bring up their past or anything like that. They have this principle, which is you play the ball. Whatever that person said, you address that particular thing. So, but the thing with politicians is this is a way that's been refined over multiple different centuries about you handle civil discourse. When your children are fighting with each other, don't intervene by being judge, jury, and executioner. Intervene by teaching them how to engage with civil discourse. It's also worth bearing in mind as well, when your children argue with you, it's also a way of them asserting their independence. So don't take it too personally that they are arguing with you. What they're trying to do is assert their independence and trying to understand what they're ultimately trying to achieve. So I'm just trying to have a look how much time I've got left. Okay, wow, we're coming up to an hour. We've just gone over an hour. So, okay, inshallah, I'll try and wrap up. I've only got, I think, 3 more slides after this. It's important, so we should talk about trust as well. How do you build the positivity? How do you build that trust? Trust is a two-way thing. It's mutual. It should go from you to the children and vice versa. When children lie to you, they're not diminishing that trust. What they're saying is, they're not diminishing that trust. What they're saying is, I care so much about what you think that I'm going to lie to you, because they're worried what you're gonna think about them. If you think about it, you don't lie to people where you don't really care what they think. So what if he thinks that about me? And therefore you don't lie to them. So in a strange way, it's almost complimentary when your children lie to you because they care what you think. But that doesn't mean you go easy on them. You say to them, you made a choice to lie to me, so there will be consequences. And when you do discipline them, when you do put them in trouble, let them know that you still love them, but you have to teach them an important lesson in life is that actions have consequences, therefore that's why they have to be disciplined. It's also important to keep in mind that your children are desperate for your acceptance. They do love you unconditionally, they really care what you think. So don't take that love away from them. Don't stop talking to them. Don't belittle them. Don't give them any reason to be able to question that love that you have for them. Because what will happen is if you carry on taking your love away from them as a punishment, they'll stop caring that you love them and they'll stop loving you as well. And then that's where your relationship will be completely destroyed. So don't use your love to blackmail your children to do what you want them to do. So just 3 more slides, inshallah. Right. The other point I'd like to make is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have made you an ummah of the middle path. We have made you an ummah of the middle path. So don't overparent and don't underparent. Don't overparent or underparent, but what does that mean? It's very easy to be able to say that. Don't isolate your children away from society. You are not going to stop your children interacting with society. The child's influence comes from 3 different places: the home, the school, and the social environment. So you could even homeschool them, but you do need to teach them how to build social skills and how to interact with it, because you're not going to always be there for them. Statistically, the probability is you're going to die before your children. I hope none of you have to bury your children. That's a terrible thing for anyone to do. So teach your children how to interact with society. You don't have to, even if you do decide to shield them away, then make sure you compensate that through something else. Don't be overbearing. Don't helicopter parent them, where you keep them away from everything. Teach them how to deal with the world. Teach them how to fail. It's important you teach them how to fail, because their first failure can't be something. I do recall a story about someone who wasn't taught how to. I mean, this is going back to the point about don't take anecdotes, but there was this one person, he did fail, and he literally threw himself off a building because he couldn't handle that failure. But it's important that you teach your children to fail. You don't want them to fail for the first time and resort to such an extreme measure. But also don't be too lax with them. Don't be too lax with them. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that we are the ummah of the middle way. What you should do is be the role model. Demonstrate emotional intelligence. So when something goes wrong, separate the emotion from the action. Yeah. So if something happens to you, you have an emotion of anger, but that action shouldn't be punching someone. That action should be talking to someone. There's a difference between emotion and action, and they are separate. When you are unhappy with something, so say your daughter does something wrong, you dislike the action, but you never dislike the person. You still love them unconditionally. And it's okay for people to get angry, but what you have to do is you have to make sure that you do the right thing from behaving like that. So you will be that role model. Certainly men will be that role model between the middle phase of the boy. Later on, there'll be less of a role model, but you'll always be there. So if you can't do this yourself, your child is not going to be able to do this. There is something out there called attachment theory. I won't get through to it, but it's how children attach themselves onto adults. And if you are someone who has outbursts of anger, where you just get so angry you start smashing things, then your children are going to have that issue. It's important as well that you as parents know that you can assert your authority. You don't have to negotiate with your children. It is not a debate. You are in charge. This is the last kind of key lesson I want to talk about, which is how to raise pious children. This is an important point here. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ma'an Abi Hurairah, qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, أكلفوا من العمل ما تطيقون فإن خير العمل أدومه وإن قل. Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, take up deeds only as much as you are able to, for the best deeds are those done regularly, even if they are few. Many parents think that raising the pious children is who was the first one to learn their salah? He was 7 when he learned his salah. He was 8 when he finished the Quran for the first time. He memorized Juz Amma by the time he was 6 years old. Parents focus on it being a race. What they don't focus on is the quality of implementation. So it doesn't matter that your child finished the Quran for the first time when he was 6 years old. What matters is that when he's 20 years old, how frequently does he recite Quran? Because and what happens is, parents will often teach the children Salah, and then they, right, I've taught you Salah, I'm out, I've backed away from it. They don't focus on executing the Salah. Teach them how to recite Quran, but they don't focus on reciting the Quran. If you want your children to be pious, focus on the implementation of the good deeds. Don't focus on teaching them and then walk away from it. Lead by example. If you teach your children that the most important thing that they have to do in a day is their Salah, but then you're missing it yourself, then you don't believe what you're saying yourself. So the kids they're not going to listen to you. They're going to break that rule, and as they're older, they're going to learn to disrespect you because you were someone who didn't believe what came out of your own mouth. So what else don't you believe that comes out of your mouth? How much can I trust someone who tells me to do one thing but he himself does something else? There's lots of other things here. I won't go into them, but Surah Shams, the ayat from 7 to 10, where they talk about the nafs wa ma sawaha, that the nafs, the one that is straightened out, it talks about tazkiyah. So the heart is influenced by what makes the heart good or what makes the heart bad. It's the thinking, the emotions, the nafs, and the ruh. These things, thinking, emotion, nafs, and ruh, you have a great deal of influence of these as parents to your children. So influence these in a positive way, and inshallah your children will be devout. Everything that I've talked about is within your control. But like with Sayyidina Nuh, and I don't doubt Sayyidina Nuh's abilities as a father, he was a Nabi after all. It is out of your control what your children do. So therefore dua is really important. Dua is really important. These are 3 of my favorite du'as from Quran. The first one is the dua Rabbi habli min ladunka dhurriyatan tayyibah. This is the dua that Zakaria made. Oh Allah, give me good offspring, and he was blessed with Nabi Yahya. There's also the other dua, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Rabbana hab lana min azwajina wa dhurriyyatina qurratan a'yunin waj'alna lil muttaqina imama. O Lord, give us from our spouses and our children comfort of our eyes and make us heads of the God-fearing. And lastly, there's the wonderful dua of Sayyidina Ibrahim, where he made this dua and he was granted with Ismail, another Nabi as a prophet. So 2 duas from Quran, which is the best type of dua, from a Nabi, where he was granted with such a pious son that son was a Nabi. This last one is from Ibrahim, where he was granted Ismail, Rabbi habli min as-salihin. So that concludes the course. There is so much out there. If anyone wants to do any further reading or understand where I got a lot of my evidences from, I've put 4 Islamic sources that are out there. Inshallah, over the next few years, I would hope that the Islamic sources would increase significantly. And I've put a number of non-Islamic sources there as well that you can go and have a look at to further your reading. And that's just a little bit about it. So that inshallah concludes the class for today. Apologies if I have overrun by about 10 minutes. I can now open it if anyone wants to ask any questions.